All right. Where do I even start? Yeah, no usual intro from me today. So I just saw, well, actually it's been a couple hours since I've been back. But I saw Avengers Endgame tonight, and this is going to be very informal, just kind of talking video. Not something people are probably going to check out too much on my channel, but if you do, cool. I just got to get my thoughts out there. This will obviously contain spoilers, so if you have not seen Avengers Endgame yet, click off this video. This is your warning for that. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and talk about this. So, I'm not a huge like comic book guy. You know, I saw a few Marvel comics when I was a kid, like here and there, but it's not something I've actively kept up with. But I do follow some people who read into the comics and they talk about it sometimes. So I do kind of know what goes on, like here and there. Like I'll hear things and read things, but I'm not someone who actively is like super into the comics. So my exposure to Marvel was mainly through these movies, and I feel like even if you don't have, I honestly feel like it's probably more devastating when something crazy happens in these movies and you aren't a comic book reader because it's not something you would have expected. Like, obviously, someone like me is just going to watch these movies and be like, okay, this is what happened. I don't really know too much beyond that. Um, so yeah, I started watching, I watched the first Iron Man. I saw it in theaters when it first came out. And I've watched every movie, all 20, well, if you count this one, 22 movies leading up to this point of Endgame, which really does feel like the end of an era. Um, Obviously, this story of Endgame was meant for the original Avengers. It's kind of like their last hurrah type thing. So, Tony, Cap, Thor, Hulk, Black Widow, Hawkeye. It was mainly a story about them, and I feel like, for the most part, I feel like they all got their chance to kind of shine in a way. Um, Obviously, I feel like Cap and Tony were, kind of the centerpieces of everything here. And it's actually kind of funny, you look at all the posters you've seen for Endgame, and even the one you have on screen right in front of you that I have for this video. You've got short hair Thor, all strong, buff, and everything. But in this movie, he's not like that at all for majority of the movie. After they do this whole 5-year time skip, excuse me, he put on some weight. He got a beer belly. He's been eating a lot. I am not a fan of Fortnite, but I did think it was kind of funny that, like, him and his roommates were, like, basically, like, video game junkies, video game, addicts and stuff like that, beer addicts, stuff like that. So I did find that pretty funny. One thing I am happy about, now, I had no problem with Captain Marvel in her own movie. Like, I enjoyed the movie, it was fine. Wasn't my favorite movie, I didn't hate it, though. I think it was smart to not have her be a center point of this movie. She really was. She was in it a little bit in the beginning, and then she didn't show up till like the end. And she did some cool stuff, but obviously because she's just kind of like a new character being thrust into this situation, if she had taken up too much screen time, fans wouldn't have liked that because it's like, oh, you're just catering to this new character, blah 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 blah. So I think it was good that she was only in kind of like the important stuff in the beginning and the end. I feel like, kind of as usual, kind of how I always feel about Rhodey War Machine. I feel like he always gets the short end of the stick in the Marvel movies. Maybe now, after, and I'll get into, other spoilers in a minute, but maybe now that everything that's happened in this movie, maybe Rhodey can kind of be more of a prevalent character moving forward. But that remains to be seen. I did like in the beginning how Tony was kind of like, once he did get rescued by Captain Marvel and they brought him back to Earth, obviously he had gone, I think he said 21 days without, food. I don't know if he said food and water or just food, but, obviously being that hungry, being that kind of out of it, your head kind of, might go a little crazy. So obviously he was mad at Cap for leaving in the first place. But then again, Tony kind of drove him to that point. But at the same time, Cap should have been honest about the whole Winter Soldier situation. So, it's kind of both ways. But I feel like it did kind of build the tension between them. And then we had like the 5-year time gap. And obviously at this point, Tony's got a kid. I don't know. Sorry for the long pause there. I'm just like, I'm trying to gather my thoughts over everything. I think the funniest thing, and kind of something I wish they had gone more into, was the transition from Banner into Professor Hulk. Because it was just like instant. We got the time skip, and the first time we see him, he's Professor Hulk, and he's like, oh, well, I just figured, if I had the Hulk under control while I'm still me, it's blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, which was cool, but it would have been nice to see that transition on screen. But obviously there was a 5-year time gap, so what are you going to do there? What else is there really? I mean, there's a ton to say. Obviously the second part of the movie is them trying to gather the Infinity Stones to basically undo what they did. And in order to do that, they have to go to different places in time, because they killed Thanos in their present timeline, right after the snap happened. But obviously there was no way to revert what had already been done, because he used the stones to destroy the stones. So they had to basically time travel in a way using, PIM technology with the quantum realm. Which I honestly thought they were going to spend more time in the quantum realm, though, with how it was kind of talked about a lot. I thought we were going to have the kind of like how in Ant-Man and the Wasp, where they were in there for an extended period of time. You actually got to see stuff around, but it was really just kind of a jumping point from time period to time period. I did think it was really cool with when Banner was dealing with I forget her name. But basically Doctor Strange's mentor, who obviously is no longer alive. But at first she was like, I'm not giving you this. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm the guardian of this. And obviously Banner knew who Strange was. And it wasn't until he mentioned that Strange had given it up and said that this was like the only way to kind of, she knew once Banner was like, oh, he gave it up willingly. Then she was like, okay, he's like the prodigy of this whole like thing. So if he did it, then it must be for a reason. He must have seen a future type thing where this had to be done. Obviously it really sucked for Hawkeye and Black Widow, because they ended up going to basically where Red Skull is. Where back in Infinity War, Thanos had to sacrifice Gamora, and in this case, one of the two of them, obviously they care deeply for each other, so one of them had to kill the other one. And it basically ended up with them both trying to kill themselves and jump off the cliff, but in the end, Black Widow ended up letting go of Clint while they were hanging off the cliff, and she smashed her skull into the rocks below. So Clint got the stone, which is obviously very hard for him. He's dealt with a lot of loss. I would say another thing that I kind of found weird was how quickly Clint's kind of little arc went. Obviously you see him at the first scene in the movie is literally him shooting a bow and arrow with his daughter, and then his whole family's kind of having like a picnic out in like the fields. And, he turns around, one of his kids disappears, and then the rest of his family's gone. And then we go 5 years later, and he's in, different countries murdering, I guess, evil people. So he essentially became Oliver Queen for a little bit. So his little transition period was kind of quick, and obviously another thing that we didn't really get to see much of. So that was kind of like, eh. But that didn't like bother me too much with the whole scope of the movie. And then obviously before they were going to start jumping through time, Tony didn't want to give up what he already had, but obviously he still had that guilt for what happened to Peter. He got Peter involved in all this in the beginning when it was in Civil War, so you could tell there was some underlying guilt, and he felt a responsibility to try and get Peter back if he could. He didn't outwardly state that, but that's kind of what I got from it. They had him pick up Peter's picture and just kind of be like, what am I really supposed to be doing here? So into the time travel stuff, obviously, like I said, we had the Clinton Natasha situation. Rhodey went with Nebula. What was I can't even remember the name of the planet, but it's from Guardians of the Galaxy 1, like pretty much right where you see Peter Quill when he first finds one of the Infinity Stones. And it was cool to see Rhodey kind of have his own little, like, scene, but I feel overall he didn't really do too much in it. I mean, it was pretty funny the way he just got to knock out Peter Quill, just, like, real quick. He was like, bop, this guy's an idiot. So I did find that very funny. And obviously, they got the stone, and then Rhodey went back, but then Nebula got messed up because I guess even though they're the same person, but they're from different time periods, they're, like, linked, so the Nebula from the present timeline was being messed up because of what was happening to the Nebula from the past. So she ended up being kept around, and they basically used both Nebulas to swap. So they had a traitor when everything went back. And Nebula basically made it so Thanos could go to the present timeline in the future to basically get all the Infinity Stones himself there. Oh yeah, and then they went to the Battle of New York. It was Cap, Tony, and Ant-Man. And a lot of the scenes in that were really funny, Oh, well, Hulk was there too. Obviously, when Banner first saw himself, I've already talked about what Banner went through, but before all that, Banner seeing himself, smash things, and then it was really funny. He's like, you should smash things a bit too. He goes out, he's like, rah, and then he, like, lightly taps a car and dents it. And then he lightly throws a motorcycle on the ground. It's like he's not really, like, into the whole destruction thing, but he did some of it anyway. What else did we have in that? Oh, it was really funny, Captain America fighting Captain America. I thought that was pretty dope, because obviously Captain America from that timeline thought it was just Loki, but obviously he eventually learned that it wasn't. Not like it mattered, because he got knocked out cold by Cap. And Tony constantly changing costumes was really funny too. And then they had to jump in time one more time. They went back to the 1970, which this is by far my favorite part of the movie. Because I always wanted, like, Tony to get some kind of closure with his father. Obviously he was like, oh, my dad was never around. My dad didn't, give a shit. He always left my mother alone, blah, 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 blah. But this was really good for both Cap and Tony, because Cap got to see what was her name? Margaret? It basically his love interest from Captain America, and kind of what she was doing. And then Tony actually got to have full-on conversations with his father when his father was younger. It was actually kind of funny that Tony introduced himself as Howard Potts. I don't know if that's going to be a reference to something in the future, or if it's a reference to something at all, but obviously Potts is Pepper's last name, so there is that. But just Tony finally getting to understand, what his father went through and all of that stuff. And obviously, I think Howard had an idea kind of towards the end, because obviously he was like, I swear I know that guy from somewhere. So he probably had some kind of inkling. I wish Tony could have told him, but at the same time, obviously he couldn't. He couldn't be like, oh, I'm your time-traveling son from, 20 whatever. Not that he would believe him at first glance anyway, but obviously they could have done something where he would have believed him. And then once they got all the stones and came back, that's where everything got messed up. Like I said, with Nebula bringing Thanos back to the current timeline, and then Thanos immediately just shoots on the Avengers compound. Everyone gets pretty messed up. But everyone gets out of that part alive. And then you've got this whole, like, fight scene. Thanos comes down to the planet. He's just sitting there. He's got his whole army ready. And the Avengers essentially assemble. Whatever ones are left. Obviously, Black Widow is dead, so she never came back to participate in the final fight. But it was really cool to kind of see them. Because at first you just had Thor, Cap, and Tony taking on Thanos on their own. But then obviously everyone started to come through, But yeah, it was just crazy at this point. Oh, I skipped over a very big detail. Who was it that I'm trying to remember real quick, because they brought everyone back. I think it was Hulk. Yeah. It was Banner who put on the glove, and they did the snap to basically bring back everyone who was snapped away by Thanos in the previous movie. But it really messed up Hulk. He didn't even really. There was a lot of fighting, but I don't think he participated in the final battle. I think his arm was just so messed up that he didn't even participate, which is unfortunate, but Professor Hulk isn't really like a fighter like that, so it makes sense that he wasn't in that part. And then what was really cool is obviously, oh, I did miss this part. Oh, I know who I forgot. Thor and Rocket, back in the time traveling stuff. They went back to during Thor 2, and they had to get the ether. But it was really cool because Thor at this point was just kind of like, he's this like anxious, nervous wreck. You know, he's still got the beer belly, which doesn't go away for the rest of the movie. Which I find interesting. You thought like as an Asgardian like him, he could just like, I don't know, lightning the fat away or something. I know it's not realistic, but whatever. It would have been cool. And the biggest, like, I guess, guilt he had during that time period was obviously that he wasn't able to save his mother, and he kind of gets to have a heart-to-heart with her, and then she's like, no, don't tell me what happens to me, blah, blah, blah. And then right before they're about to go back to the regular time period, he reaches his hand out, and Mjolnir comes to him, so he's obviously still worthy to wield Mjolnir. And what the cool part was is, you know, you've got this whole thing, Tony's down, Thor gets taken down, and then Cap is just like blocking with his shield, blocking, and then he picks up Mjolnir from where Thor had dropped it, like just effortlessly. Like, I mean, actually, no, I think he threw it and then he like called it back to him, because I remember Thanos getting hit with it. So I thought that was pretty cool. That was actually like a really cool scene. You know, the entire theater was like screaming and cheering about it. But I thought there would have been more build up to it, like maybe a slow picking up of the hammer, slowly struggling at first, but then he like lifts it. Because obviously he tried to pick it up in Age of Ultron, but was unable to pick it up. He was able to like budget a little bit, but I guess at this point Captain America is like truly worthy at this point. Which was pretty cool, you know, seeing Cap fight with Mjolnir, and then they do this funny exchange when the bigger fighting happens where they called the wrong weapons to each other, because I guess Thor had gotten so used to Stormbreaker that he just likes it more, but Stormbreaker went to Cap's hand and Mjolnir went back to Thor's, and they're like, you know what, let's switch. So I thought that was pretty funny. And then because everyone essentially got unsnapped, you get this awesome scene with all these like riffs from different parts of the world or whatever, and you see Doctor Strange, you know, basically bringing everyone who was snapped back. You know, you see Black Panther, you see Spider-Man, you see all the Valkyries from Asgard. You just see everybody come back, which was really, really dope. You know, obviously you saw the Guardians of the Galaxy, just everyone was back, and you get this whole huge scale war between Thanos' army and that he brought back with him somehow, and the Avengers. And the coolest part about that was just like Cap being Avengers Assemble. And, you know, you've got hundreds, probably close to 1,000 like people who are like on this side that he's like referring to. Now, obviously, the Avengers themselves are probably like the main ones, you know, the ones with the superpowers. But obviously, you had all of, you know, the Wakandan army and all that stuff, which was really cool. And like I said, the remnants of Asgard. And then you've got this whole full-scale war, which was dope. You got Scarlet Witch. She was doing a lot of fighting. That was really cool. She fought Thanos a bit on her own. I'd say the coolest part, not even the coolest part, but a really cool part of that fight was you just see like, oh, like shit, we're gonna be screwed. You see all the guns on Thanos' like main ship aiming down, they're shooting, and then they're about to be finished off, and suddenly they're shooting at something in the sky, and then you see Captain Marvel, who got a haircut at some point, and just flies through the entire ship, destroying it. And that's when, you know, the Avengers realize they have the upper hand. You've got Scott, like Ant-Man, and then you've got Wasp. She's there too. They're fighting side by side. You got War Machine. He was doing some fighting. Pretty much everyone was just trying to play hot potato with the Infinity Gauntlet that they had created. Hawkeye had it at first. I know Black Panther had it for a little bit. Then he threw it to Spider-Man. Spider-Man had it for a while until he gave it to he gave it to Captain Marvel. But in the end, Thanos ended up getting the gauntlet. He puts it on and he's about to snap his fingers. Captain Marvel's like prying his like thumb away from his snapping fingers so that it can't happen. And then you see Tony jump in and he does something real quick. And then Thanos snaps his fingers, but nothing happens. So the coolest part about that was that I guess Tony somehow fashioned his Iron Man suit to take the Infinity Stones. And then before that, I know, like I said, I'm jumping around a lot. What was really cool was like, what were his words exactly? And he said it multiple times in the movie. Thanos was like, "I am inevitable." And the really coolest callback of the movie was, Tony has all of the Infinity Stones. Right as he's about to snap, he's like, "I am Iron Man." Obviously back to Iron Man 1 when he reveals to the world who he is. So he snaps. All of Thanos' army just fades from existence. So Tony essentially killed them all. But unfortunately, as we saw with Hulk, so obviously Hulk was incapacitated from snapping. He didn't die, but he was like heavily injured. So someone like Tony, who's just a regular human being inside of a suit, it's gonna have repercussions. And the repercussions for this were him essentially dying. You got his arm was all messed up. He had these like black lines all over his face. His face was burnt. He's leaning up against the wall, and here's where the sad scene comes that everyone in the theater was just like, oh my god, about, because we didn't expect it. A lot of people expected Cap to die in this, so it was really surprising when it was actually Tony who ends up dying. You get this emotional scene where Rhodey shows up, he starts crying a bit, and then the saddest part is obviously with Peter. He saw Tony essentially as a father figure, so you've got Peter being like, "We did it, Mr. Stark. I'm sorry." And then, I totally forgot the the biggest surprise to me. I mean, it wasn't the biggest surprise because I played some Marvel video games where she's been a thing. But Pepper in her rescue Iron Man suit was really, really cool. Which I thought was weird just because when would she have practiced it? I mean, I guess she could have tried using it over the years because there was a 5-year time gap to when he would have created it. But I did find it interesting how good she was at using it. And they did something before that too, when they were like trying to essentially have Captain Marvel have like the glove. You had all the women, all the main women from the MCU kind of like being like, "Oh, we'll back you up." So that was a really cool scene. But back to the scene with Tony, obviously it was very sad. You see him just kind of die there. And then right after that, they have this big funeral for him where pretty much everyone important to the MCU was at that funeral. Even you saw Nick Fury there too. I wish he would have said something. Like, I wish there would have been a scene of him at the grave, kind of talking about how he found Tony back in Iron Man 2 and, where everything went to by now. But, and then after that, you've got the whole thing where basically the Infinity Stones have to be placed back in the same points of time that they were taken from, which is cool because obviously they don't want to, have any fluctuations with the weird timeline stuff. And the thing is Cap was only supposed to be gone for like 5 seconds to them. But obviously for him, it would be a longer period of time. He was just supposed to drop the stones back off in the place of time they were at. He doesn't come back. And then you see Falcon and you see Winter Soldier. They look over and there's an old man sitting on a bench and it's Captain America, which I don't really understand because at first they were explaining it like it was like, oh, you can't just change the past and it changes the future. But the way this movie ends, Cap did change the past and ended up in the future as an old man. So how did the future timeline get whatever. I'm not going to think too much about it. but it was essentially old man Cap. He wanted to live a normal life, so he ended up living. He went back in time. He ended up living out his life with, his love interest from Captain America 1, and that's pretty much where things went. And this was very interesting to me because a lot of people over the years have said, okay, Bucky's going to be the next Captain America. He's going to inherit the shield after all this. But they went a completely different route. Obviously, this is something in the comics as well where Falcon becomes Captain America. And Captain basically takes the shield out and he gives it to Falcon. So I find this very interesting that they're going to make Falcon the next Captain America, essentially is what it seems like they're doing. Because Falcon's in the movies has kind of been this like B-list superhero. So they're really kind of banking on Anthony Mackie to really kind of bring his A game when it comes to acting to be the next Captain America for these future movies. I assume we'll get another movie, but I don't know if they'll call it like Captain America something because it's still, he's Falcon. But I guess we'll see what the future holds for that. So obviously we're going to have like Falcon, Captain America in these future films. But and the movie pretty much ends with a flashback to Cap basically dancing with his wife, and it's like a flashback to when he was younger, when they first started living together, and that's pretty much where it ends, and then it rolls credits. I love this movie. I don't know if it's... I want to say it's my favorite right now. But at the same time, I really do love Civil War. Infinity War was good, but I feel like Infinity War was much more action than it was story. Obviously it had the very basic story, but Endgame really kind of was heavy on the story. The first two arcs of the movie, or like story arcs, are not very heavily action oriented. It's not till the like third act where, I don't know why I said arc before, I meant act, where all the kind of heavy action was. And I do like that. I do prefer story over straight action. But overall, I think I'm just curious. I mean, it's really hard to say for me because on one hand, I'm really sad that this is all kind of over. Cap and Tony's story is done. Robert Downey Jr. and Chris Evans are done with the MCU as it appears. So I'm just very curious where they're going to take things from here. Because they still have a lot of important actors who can, fulfill roles. Jeremy Renner, Chris Hemsworth, Mark Ruffalo are all very popular MCU actors now. Obviously, they're going to be working on Captain Marvel, Brie Larson for a good while. Obviously, I can't remember his name, but Ant-Man, essentially, he's kind of newer, but not like super new still. But yeah, it'll just be very interesting to see where they go from here. And obviously, there's going to be more Avengers movies. But I just wonder how many movies we're going to get before we get the next Avengers. Because if you really think about it, 2012 was Avengers 1. 2015, we had Age of Ultron. And then we didn't get the next Avengers till 2018. So it's really 3-year time skips, or time gaps. Obviously, with Infinity War and Endgame, they did them back-to-back because it was 2 parts of the same story. But after Endgame, I'm guessing we'll probably have a good 3-year time gap for them to get some movies under their belt with some new characters before we get the next Avengers movie. But I don't see them bringing back Robert Downey Jr. or Chris Evans for anything. I mean, I guess they could do an old man Cap thing if they really wanted to, but I really just don't see it happening. And also at the same time, like, I'm curious if these actors... if the MCU, kind of like with Wolverine, because I feel like, now people may disagree with this, but I feel like X-Men has kind of fallen off ever since we lost Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I had people in my the Dark Phoenix, or whatever you call it, Phoenix X-Men movie trailer. People didn't even care in my theater about that. They were like booing it. There were some people booing the movie trailer because they don't care. So I just hope that doesn't happen with the MCU, once all these kids, because Thor's probably got a few more movies left in him. We've probably got a few more Hulk stuff. Obviously, they can keep Hawkeye in. He's kind of like he's a main Avenger, but he's not like someone who's probably going to get his own movie. And obviously, we've still got War Machine, which will be interesting to me because, I feel like Tony did all the upgrades for Rhodey, so obviously someone else is going to have to take care of maintaining their tech. And I guess Banner for now will fit that role, but I'm very interested to see where they're going to go moving forward with the MCU. I made this review really... It was more of kind of a recap, and I was telling you my feelings as I recapped the movie. Which I didn't intend to do, but it ended up happening anyway, so oh well. But if you guys saw the movie, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you enjoyed it. Let me know what your nitpicks were. Well, actually, yeah, I mean, I'll probably put spoiler in the title. I was going to say, don't let me know down below, because, maybe people didn't see the movie, but let me know down below what your favorite moment in the movie was, definitely. And, thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more if you're new to the channel. I will see you all next time. Have a wonderful day, everyone.